Well, good afternoon. I feel like I need to do confession here. I missed Ray's talk earlier today. I was on a call, unfortunately, but I was part of the evil empire of Medtronic for 20 years. I led strategy and business development for the neuromodulation sector and had many discussions with Ray. As penance, I had to leave and go become a startup uh, CEO and co-founder and try to raise money in the current environment and try to follow in Ray's footsteps. So thank you for your example. And okay, thank you. And if anybody's interested over a beer, you can talk about culture changes at Medtronic. So anyways, so Paxos Medical. So as you'll see, this is a little bit different. We're in the pelvic health space, neuromodulation. We're not doing overactive bladder. There is plenty of smart people going after overactive bladder. Lots of different great solutions come to the market. What we're trying to do is a different problem, those with underactive bladder. So people who have to use catheters to void their bladder, 4 to 6, are on a daily basis. And so what we're trying to do is to use a neuromodulation system such that they could use an app, and when they're ready to void, be able to push a button through Bluetooth, communicate to the device, and stimulate nerves that will cause them to void. So underactive bladder, we're using this name because overactive bladder is so well known. It is the opposite indication. It's also known as non-obstructive urinary retention. I think that's where a lot of people would know the disease. Obstructive urinary retention, typically it's a surgical, some sort of ablation. They take care of the obstruction. Here, that's not the issue. These patients have damage to the nerves that innervate the detrusor muscle that start a void. And unfortunately, there's one nerve essentially that starts the process of urination. Fortunately, as you'll hear, there are other nerves that are responsible for maintaining the void, and that's what we're stimulating. So today, these patients are forced to use catheters. They use about 2,000 a year. Can imagine every day, 4 to 6 times, having to use a catheter to place it up into your bladder to void. It is painful. It causes infection. It is not something that you want, and this is lifelong. Once patients get to this point where they have to catheterize, there's about 2 million patients in the US. They're going to do that for the rest of their life. There's not a drug that works, and to date, there's not another device that works. Typically, it's a result of one of two things. It's either a trauma situation of a coworker, her husband is a mountain biker, he fell, shattered his pelvis. Instantly, he could no longer innervate that muscle. The nerve had been cut, and he now has to use catheters the rest of his life. Others have non-trauma situations, such as diabetes, MS, other diseases that impact the nerve's ability to innervate the muscle. So our device, I had this discussion at lunch today, and thanks to all the great opportunities around us, we're not innovating on the device right now. What we're going to do is go prove that the therapy works, because there are lots of devices out there that can stimulate. I often will say, I could take any of Medtronic's devices, pain, brain, pelvic health, and I could place the lead at the right spot and program it to deliver this therapy. Obviously, we want to make it as least invasive. We want to make the procedure as easy to deliver. But right now, our focus is on demonstrating that the therapy works. So in our vision of where we're going, the therapy will be very similar to OAB, sacral neuromod, where a clinician would use a catheter to place the lead next to the nerve target. It was done in an ASC setting. We've used existing reimbursement codes. So we're not trying to recreate the world. What we're trying to do is leverage the technology that others have built to go after a new indication, new patient population that can benefit. So what is the mechanism? So my co-founder, Matt Frazier at Duke University, I met him while I was at Medtronic, and he was an academic researcher for us. He did a lot of the work on trying to reduce the amount of time we need to stimulate for OAB. He was working in the background on these patients. He saw that the OAB field was getting busy, and so he went back and looked at some of the work by a famous scientist called Barrington. It was done in the early 1900s. And what Barrington did was he took cats and he severed several of the nerves that were involved in the voiding process. And what he realized is that there were multiple nerves that were responsible for maintaining a void, where there was only one nerve that was responsible for initiating a void. And so what we're doing is we're stimulating those nerves that are responsible for maintaining. Luckily, there's 6 of them. There's 3 on either side of our target. And so there may be multiple nerves that have been damaged, but if you have one of those 6 still patent, we believe we can still drive a void. We stimulate for 60 seconds, so the patient only uses the device when they need to void their bladder. Push a button on an app, device is activated, stimulates. Average micturition, average void is 20 seconds. And so with 60 seconds, even if they have some motor issues, we think we can get a full void. This is just some of his preclinical work that was done at Duke that led to the intellectual property portfolio we have. Essentially, he looked at different, he has a novel target, and then different stimulation parameters that would allow us to do this. And interestingly, OAB is at a very different frequency and a different target to where we're stimulating. So different frequency, different target, and that's what our intellectual property covers. And we also, what he found is actually get 80% of the animals to void at one frequency. He got the remainder to void at the next frequency. We had some efficacy as we went up. So we blocked that whole area. But what's interesting about this is we're trying to innervate a muscle. We're not doing sensory stim. This is, I guess, from my perspective, one of the lowest levels of neuromodulation, the easiest neuromodulation to do. And what we believe is that if you have one of those 6 nerves in place, we can test and make sure you do, but we think we'll have 100% efficacy with those patients that have one of those remaining nerves. So we think it's going to have a much higher efficacy, say, than OAB, where you're reducing the number of voids, but the patient still has to wear a diaper, has to be mindful of their fluid intake. This, we think, will be able to replace the use of catheters completely. So timeline, everybody's got a timeline. We've been doing quite a bit of work. We formed the company in October, so we're a relatively new company. We out-licensed all of the IP out of Duke. We are in the process of raising a seed financing that's going to lead to a 15-patient feasibility study. We're going to use an off-the-shelf device to do that study. So we'll stimulate our targets with our programming parameters, and then we'll demonstrate to investors that the therapy works. Then we'll go and we'll select the device that we're going to take into our pivotal trial and do that work. One other option that we would consider is working with a strategic. That's a possibility. We don't need to have a unique device. If there's an opportunity to work on a strategic structured deal, certainly would be open to that. So the fundraising we're doing is $4 million. I've broken it up. We're partially through our first million. The first million is for 2 studies that we need to do before we do the feasibility study. So we're raising that. We'll then start later this year, the human feasibility study. We were selected as a medtech innovator company. For any startups here, highly recommend you look at that program. It's very difficult to get into. I think they take like 5% of the companies, but it's a great ecosystem. It has entrepreneurs, it has strategics, it has suppliers, and it just has been a great experience for us in terms of giving us exposure and giving us access to an infrastructure to help us as an early stage company to progress. Myself, I talked about, I have a background in Medtronic, neuromodulation. Matt Frazier is a career academic scientist who started his career at the University of Pittsburgh. He was at Duke before he left to become our CSO full-time. We're very blessed. Dr. Chappell, Dr. Peters are sort of podium presence in urological neuromodulation. The rest of those clinicians there, they do a ton of clinical trials. Dr. Sahai and Malde are going to do our human cadaver work. Dr. Peters is going to do some of our additional sheep studies. They're really blessed to have some really great clinical talent that is focused on and wants to solve this issue. So just in summary, again, we'll see. We hope that if patients have one of these nerves intact, we'll be able to have 100% efficacy with the large patient population without a lot of good alternatives. Urologists are great clinicians to work with. They're surgeons. They also use imaging. And so they already know how to do neuromodulation. They're familiar with it. It's different targets. So we'll need to teach that. And then we've talked about the rest of the team. So with that, I'll finish there.
So Jeff, you talked about some potential exits. Who would be an example of a strategic partner that might want to be interested in this technology?
So we have two areas of strategic interest. One is the neuromodulation companies, obviously Boston and Medtronic, but the other is the catheter companies. So for instance, Coloplast acquired an OAB company.
12 continents or 9 continents.
Yeah, a couple of years ago.
Which was a very big deal. It was definitely over 100.
Yep. They are very concerned though about us, disrupting their market. That's a $5 billion urinary catheter market. So it's a very large market, very good margins. Mm-hmm. And so their interest is there as well.
Yeah. Okay. So between the traditional neuromodulation players, and obviously who they are, and these other med techs who are not yet in neuromodulation, would you see one of them who's not currently a neuromodulation player wanting to get in with your technology?
I think so. I think there's.
So you mentioned Coloplast, but what about some of the other rehabilitation companies? Right?
Sure. Yeah, I think what we're going to have to do, there's 2 points, I think, where this asset will be monetized. One is either right before FDA approval, where a existing neuromodulation company would acquire the data, submit a PMA supplement to put it on their device, or...
By the way, it was Ray's advice this morning.
Okay.
Or one of his pieces of advice. But...
Or we're going to have to go and build a sales force, build some revenue, because I think, and Ray can talk about this better than I can, my understanding of Boston, I think they looked at that asset forever. They had a urology business. They had a neuromodulation business. Mm-hmm. Urology didn't sell active implantables, and neuromodulation didn't sell to urologists. So I think that, for somebody who's not currently having an active implantable in the urology space, I think we're going to have to build some infrastructure before they would be able to acquire us. Probably take a path similar to Ray, take the company public, continue to pursue that path, then let them acquire it at an appropriate time.
Okay. And how would it coexist with an existing SNS product?
Yeah, so one of our strategies is the FDA has Section 216, the 6-year rule, where you can take a device like one of these, you can show equivalency, and you can put in a PMA supplement, to get FDA approval for that indication. So an existing indication where there's not been safety issues, good efficacy, you don't have to do the clinical trials. So for us, part of our strategy would be, well, let's go ahead and develop the new indication, use that to get into account, and at the same time, then bring that in.
Expedite regulatory approval. And
not for underactive bladder. Underactive bladder will be a PMA, but actually having OAB,
it would get you in the door.
Underactive bladder would get us in the door, and then we could also offer overactive bladder with the same device.
Got it. But that would be less likely to be an existing SNS.
That would be a new company that wants to be in the space. Absolutely.
Interesting. All right. Well, looks very promising. Thanks very much.
Yeah.